Hanuman was sent to tell others about Ravana's fall. And in the meanwhile, Vibhishan, that good brother of Ravana, is going to be crowned as the king of Lanka. So instead of arrogance and passion, instead of ego itself being being the ruler of Lanka, Vibhishan is going to become the king. That sense of consciousness becomes the king, because he was that role of conscience. Vibhishan was the good demon. He's the one that's there to keep Dharma alive. He's the one that gives us the opportunity to make our way back to the divine. And so now, right, he is the king of Lanka. It is conscience that's the king of our ego structure, not the arrogance and the passion and the ego that was, the false ego that was Ravana. When Ravana rules, arrogance, passion, they dictate over our lives. There's no self-restraint, there's no sense of humility. Conscience was powerless under Ravana. It recognized right from wrong, but it had no way of acting on it. But after the death of Ravana, conscience is crowned and the priorities can be set right. And that's what happens with the crowning of Vibhishan. Conscience has the power to lead the devotees back towards God. And just as he is taking the people of Lanka back towards God, he is also going to take on the role of leading Sita back to Ram. Now, theologically, this is a very important point too, because all religious traditions, they give us discipline, they give us practice, and the point is to tame our lower natures. We saw a lot of this when we talked about the Bhagavad Gita, about how you had to have discipline in everything that you do. You can't, just go into something and immediately be able to do it. You have to put forth the necessary discipline. You need to, put forth the effort, which means maybe rejecting other things in the process. Morality, self-discipline, they become the defining traits within religion. And any time that we adopt these attitudes and these practices, conscience is going to be able to rule, and the ego can be overridden. And this becomes something that's now possible for everyone once Vibhishan is on the throne of Lanka. So Vibhishan is going to lead Sita back to Ram, and when she sees him, Sita is just overjoyed. She is happy beyond belief at being in his presence again. She can hardly hold back her emotion. She wants to run to him and embrace him. But when she gets there, she finds that Ram is very deep in thought, and he's not able to earn her emotions. There's another trial that she has to endure. Sita had been kidnapped. She'd been taken to Lanka and held there in Ravana's, she stayed in Ravana's garden. She refused to go in his house. But she had remained there and lived in this land of demons for a whole year. And so there is the potential that she might have been tainted by that. She might not be pure as she once was. And so Ram says it's not proper to just be able to take her back. As much as he wants to, as much as he believes, for the sake of the people, for all, we have to prove that she is still pure. And so Sita's purity has to be tested. Looking at sort of an east-west cross-comparison here, there's a couple of biblical parallels that we could consider. First of all, Moses, remember, is going to lead the Jewish people, the Hebrews, out of Egypt. Now, in Egypt, of course, there was the Jewish people living amongst the Egyptians. There was all of the pagan deities that were being idolized and worshipped, and many of the Jews were paying homage and heed and making sacrifices to those figures. Moses leads them away from that land into the desert. But it's not that far from Egypt up to Jerusalem. But yet it takes 40 years for him to get there. And Moses dies just a few miles outside. No one who was tainted by the corruption of Egypt was allowed to get into this new promised land. Right? Because that impurity from then would carry over to the impurity from now. Moses was essentially a devotee. He gave his all, but he's not allowed to enter the promised land because of that original taint. None of that first generation that set off from Egypt would be able to make it in. Only those people who were born en route, only those after the episode of the golden calf would essentially be able to be allowed into this promised land. And that's what the rule of Ram is going to be. This Ram Raj, this rule of Ram, is going to be that paradise. It's going to be that promised land. And so you have to make sure that anyone who goes there has a sense of purity. Another east-west parallel goes to the story of the Akedah, which we've already talked about, right? When Abraham is told to take Isaac to the top of Mount Moriah and to offer him there for sacrifice. But I think we mentioned earlier on in the course that in that particular situation, a lot of times people think about it as being a sort of test of some sort. It's not really a test for God. It's a test for Isaac. All right, Isaac has to prove to himself that he has the capacity, the ability to do what needs to be done, that his faith is strong enough. And so, by comparison, some people have argued that when Sita is tested by Ram, the test is not for Ram. He already knows that Sita is pure. He already knows that she's not tainted by the demon stronghold, that she is going to be his companion in this life. But she has to find this out for herself. She has to eliminate any doubt within her own mind, and that's what the test does. Now, what exactly is this test? Well, there's a number of different versions of what happens next, depending upon what you're reading. In one version, long before Sita was ever captured, Ram told her to take on what he called a shadow form so that she couldn't be harmed. Right? Remember when Hanuman was being attacked by Ravana and his guards and set on fire, she had issued a prayer to essentially make the fire burn cool against him. In other words, she produced a shadow form of that being so that he would not be harmed. And so some people have argued, according to one version anyway, that this is what happens. Sita is got a projection on. She's being shielded or protected in some way so that when she walks into the fire, the shadow form gets burned up, but the true Sita can walk from it unharmed. And when that happens, Ram and Sita would be able to be reunited. In another version, Sita becomes very distressed by what Ram has said, and she wants to prove that she was stolen away by trickery and that she remained pure this entire year. So Sita makes the decision. She chooses to walk into the fire of purification. But before she steps into the fire, she reverently prays to the fire god Agni, just like she did earlier to try to help Hanuman. And she says, "If I am pure, of fire protect me." And after saying that prayer, she walks into the fire. Agni lifts her up unharmed and presents her to Ram, and they're both able to be together at that point. Now, in this more interesting version, Sita is actually stepping into the fire. But the fire is a liberation. Right? This idea of the fire, it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for liberation. She goes into it, the fire purifies, and what comes out is the ideal form, not the corrupt human entity, but the reality of the true Sita as divine entity. Once a devotee has been liberated, the ego is no longer necessary. And so walking into the fire is symbolizing the destruction of that ego, whether it's Sita, whether it's any other devotee. Because she is pure, what's happening through the walking through fire is that the ego itself, that thing that all of the harm attaches itself to, is going to be destroyed, and the true self can emerge. Now Ram, of course, cannot return back to Ayodhya without his queen. So Sita has to emerge from the fire. Again, there's an illusory ego when we become liberated. When we're no longer slave to the senses, we're no longer imprisoned by our ego structure. Sages, saints, holy people, in order to stay here on earth, they have to have an illusory superstructure, an ego structure. But that ego structure is not real, it's illusory. They don't identify with it. And after their work is done, and they've left this wisdom behind, right, the rest of us are going to be able to use it on our journey. When they release that ego structure, they leave that form behind, they become united back with the one divine being. They are one, they are with God. And so Sita proves herself as a pure being. Her true nature becomes known, just as we've seen the true nature of Ram being manifest, right? And so now we know that these two divine beings, the male and female aspect of the divine, are as they should be, and they are ready to be reunited. They are ready to rule. Now, regardless of which version that we talk about, Sita and Ram are going to be reunited. And when they do so, it's right at the very end of that 14-year period. Remember that back in the beginning, right, Ram was to be cast away into the forest, and his brother and Sita came along with him. Bharat was supposed to have been made king because of that boon that that Dasharat had issued, but he refused to do it. He felt that Ram was the rightful ruler, and so he took Ram's sandals back, put them on the throne, and he said, "They are the ruler. It is there. I will act as a regent only." But he also said that if you're not back on the very day that your 14-year exile is up, that I'm going to walk into the fire and die. I will not rule this place. It is yours. Well, it's right there at the end. Time is of the essence. And so they have to get back. There's only a few days left before Bharat's going to walk into that fire and die. So they race back to Ayodhya. And as they do, they get there and they're able to stop Bharat from walking into the fire. And he's very pleased. He bows down before Ram. He acknowledges the duty that he owes to Ram, and so on. And so Ram and Sita, along with the bears and the monkeys, They are all gathered together for Ram's coronation. With the coronation, we have what's known as the Ram Raj, the rule of Ram. And this is a time essentially of like heaven on earth. Ram is back in Ayodhya. He's crowned as the king, and he is going to reign as king with peace and goodness for 1,000 years. And when that time is up, you're going to see this ascension. You can see in the image, the picture on the screen there, the aspects of the deity. You have Ram, Lakshman, and Sita on their heavenly throne, and they are going to ascend back to the heavens. And let's just take a look at that episode in the book, right around 660, I think it was. Yeah, 660. All right. When Ram became Vishnu again, Bharat and Shatrughna also entered into the blue god. They were also absorbed into the Infinite One. When the Devas worshipped that vision, as did the Sadyas, the Marut hosts with Indra and Agni at their head, all the Munis of the three worlds worshipped him. The Gandhavaras, the Asparas, the Suparnas, the Nagyas, the Yakshas, the Daityas, the Danavas, the great Rakshasas. Mahavishnu's voice said to Brahm, "These men and their families have followed me in love. They have abandoned their very lives to be with me. They are like my own self. Let them be blessed. Let all the birds and beasts who have followed me be blessed." And Brahma said, "They shall all come to Santanaka, where there is every joy and no death. And those of them that were once born of the Devas shall be Devas again. The Varnas who were Devas in Amsa, whose sires were the ones of light, assured their fathers illustrious immortal forms again. The Rakshasas did as well. Sugriv entered the blazing disk of the sun. He was one with his father Surya. Great Vishnu stood at the mouth of the golden path and led out this world, the Goparata. He opened his arms wide to them. In waves like a river flowing into the sea, that throng of Rama Bhaktas walked into the Sarayu. As soon as the holy water touched them, their mortal bodies dissolved, and they rose up in resplendent forms of light. Man and beast were like God. Why, even the rocks in the Sarayu that day were saved and rose with the shining spirit bodies. When the last of the Bhaktas had ascended, Ram himself rose out of this world. He left his grace upon the earth for an age, and the undying memory of a perfect life and a perfect reign. Ramaraj. Narayana was in Vaikuntha again, and there Sita, who is the Devi Lakshmi, waited for him. Om Shanti 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 Om.